So does anybody see it starting? It says start. Do you see a
Yeah.
start? Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
recording the call.
All right. So welcome to the Sunday afternoon in Thailand time to this the Sangha UK call. Most of the people on the call are in not in the United States. So today we're going to be talking about perception and what it means. Now, the Pali word for perception is sanya, but it also has another Pali word that's used most specifically in the Paticca where it calls it namarupa. And basically, what namarupa means is that rupa is the real. That's what we take in as sensory input, and that then we do something with it, we process it. And that processing part would be coming up with some knowledge about it, something that we know, and that we could actually go so far as to say that we name it. We give it a name or we give it a handle. And that this processing or perception can sometimes be lickety split. It could be almost instantaneous. It could almost be in the sense of circuitry that's hardwired so that it takes no time at all or a microsecond to go through that junction. And that an example would be that when you see somebody, you immediately or instantly recognize them. How is that possible? Because we got to look through an entire big database of faces and all kinds of different objects to come up with it. And yet we can recognize someone instantly. A next one would be that the idea of first impressions, that even when we meet somebody new, we almost automatically judge them in some way or another. How can we come up with that perception that happens so fast? And then there's another kind of perception that's really slow. In fact, sometimes we can get stuck in it. And that this would be what we would be calling worry. In other words, worry or doubt is when we are perceiving and perceiving and perceiving and perceiving, trying to come up with some understanding. But that doesn't happen instantly in every case. Sometimes it takes very little time, and sometimes it happens quite instantly. The question that we could begin to ask then is that when you're in the process of perception, do you know it? Now, the word perception actually is perceiving, and seeing means to be sight. All right. So, in fact, a good way to talk about this is that as far as consciousness goes, there are two kinds of consciousnesses. Excuse me, I'm conscious that the mosquitoes are out. And so I'm going to light a mosquito coil. So, as things happen, sometimes quickly and sometimes slowly, are you aware of this? Now, when we say aware of the process is a little bit different than aware of what we're perceiving. And so let's look at consciousness for a second. There's two different kinds of consciousness. One is the kind of consciousness that is actual, the observation. So we can say we see it, like we see a tree or we see a car. Now, we will perceive that car, let us say, coming down the road, and make a judgment as to its speed, its direction, etc., like that, so that we can make a decision like quickly. Can I waltz across the road? Can I meander across the road? Or should I step it up to get out of the way of that car? And that kind of perception is very quick. So the two kinds of perception or two kinds of consciousness would be, I see the car. And then the next kind of consciousness is the consciousness of, do I have to get out of its way or am I safe? I normally explain this by talking about it in the process of I see it with my eyes. And then the second kind of perception is I see what you mean, or I see that I have time. Or if somebody throws a ball, we can see the ball, but it takes perception in order to judge where that ball is going so that I can very quickly figure out, can I catch it? Can I dodge it? Is it nowhere near me? So that's the second kind of perception, is the kind of perception that is after the perception. This is in the Pali, is what is called the Salayatana. And that Salayatana, hello, Gary, good to see you.
Hi, Dhammarato. Hi, everybody. Hi.
Sorry, Jerry. All right. So we're talking about perception today, and that something happens before perception, which is called consciousness, and then something happens after perception, which we also call consciousness. Now, that second kind in the Pali is called Salayatana, but it is also sometimes referred to as consciousness. For sure, in the study of philosophy, they call consciousness that second kind of consciousness, that which we are conscious of rather than that which is input. So we take any kind of input that we have and we process it as perception, and then deception is that we see it or that we understand it. Now, we can actually perceive something and to not come up with a solution to it, and so we'll go back and perceive again and over again, or spend a long time in perception without ever coming to a conclusion. This would be something like with the computer, that you would do a search, and the search doesn't come up instantly. It takes a long time, and then finally it comes up with either here's the results of the search or there's no results to have. But sometimes that searching takes a long time, and sometimes it's instant. Basic, I guess, upon how complex the data is that we're trying to grasp hold of. And so in order to take it a little bit further, it's that second kind of consciousness that impacts us, not the first kind. That the first kind needs to be processed, and then the result is what contacts us. Once we perceive something, it will touch us. And that's where our feelings come from. Now, there is a couple of places in the suttas where it talks about the point that if there is no perception, then there is no feelings. And that's quite obvious if you understand the process of how the mind works with paticca samuppada. Or if we perceive something and don't get a good answer for it, then the feeling that we will have will be confusion. And that confusion will automatically turn back around into perception to try to figure it out or perceive it so that we get a satisfactory answer. Does anybody have any questions about this so far? All right, Carl, yes.
So when you say, I would imagine it as an example would be somebody speaking the language you don't understand, and you don't understand a single word they're saying. You don't really make anything out of it other than noise. So that is perception of just noise. But then if you do understand, then you apply what is it, like more. There's another perception of like feelings to the words they're saying. How do you feel about the words they're saying? How do you relate from what attitude you're coming from?
After we make a choice, or after we kind of figure out what it is that they're saying.
Yes.
So if they're speaking a foreign language that you don't understand, we will kind of keep caught up in perception, trying to figure out what they're talking about, trying to hear one word or two words that we can understand, and then try to put it back together again.
There's an interesting thing about this with non-native languages. You have a halfway house where because you have to take some extra time to understand what is being spoken in the non-native language, researchers have found that you're less emotional, or you're reacting less emotionally to what's being said, because it's not being understood kind of subconsciously.
Right.
And you're more logical, actually, when you're thinking or speaking or doing business in a non-native language that you're not fluent in.
Right. So basically, one thing that you pointed to is that while we are perceiving something, we are not feeling. That feeling comes after we think that we figured it out. After we understand something is when the feelings come. And if we don't figure it out, then the feeling that does come is a feeling of confusion, of unsureness. So, Amit, you've got your...
Yeah, I also have a question. According to the this definition of perception, right? So the first is the input come from the external world, like a car. And afterward, there is this processing happening, which is also a perception, right? Sanyata. But input can also come from the mind. For instance, I could think of what kind of food I'm gonna eat today.
Yes.
And now there's a processing happening around it. So this would also be classified as a perception.
Yes, it would be. And that points back to the fact that there are not 5 sense doors, there are 6. The eyes, the ears, the tongue and taste, the sense of smell, the sense of touch, which is quite complex, and then the 6th one is the mind. That in fact, the mind is the most predominant one. We get more input from our own mind than we do from any place else. And so that consciousness that we bring up, basically the language of the mind is then the perception itself, but the input can come from the mind. So we have a thought, and then we mull it over, and that mulling over is then perception. Let me consider it. Let me mull it over. Let me think about it. This is all perception. And we generally don't have feelings about it unless we come up with that perception of no result. And the no result then has a kind of a feeling to it. Once that no result impacts us, we have a feeling of confusion, the third kind of feeling. And so this mulling over that we do, basically it takes sometimes a long time to mull something over because we're trying to get new input data or we're trying to figure it out based upon the past. That's also true about the kind of consciousness that also leads into perception as a form of consciousness, that when we have mind consciousness, that means that we give data for the perception process, but that the feelings don't happen until after we make a conclusion. That conclusion that we come up with is the Salayatana. Imagine that it's kind of like this, that the Salayatana is like a movie screen, and the audio in the cinema or the movie theater presents itself on the screen and gives the audio. But in order for that result to happen, there had to have been a camera someplace in the beginning. So the camera is the input recording the data, and then the movie screen is the output. And oftentimes, as you know, what was the input from the camera is not necessarily the output from the screen. Why? Because it goes in the old days through what they called the cutting room floor, where they cut out stuff, changed it around or whatever like that. So the movie that is shown in the movie theater is not the movie that the cameraman shot. It got messed up. It got mixed up. It got things cut out of it. It had things added from, let's say, some library someplace to come up with that final movie. Well, the mind does that exact same thing, that in fact, our library is all of our past. That in fact, when you can see somebody and you immediately and instantly recognize them, that's because you have quite a lot of data stored about them in the mind. And so you see the person's input, and then you process that with the perception, using all of the data from your memory systems to come up to recognize someone. Now, it is quite possible. It happens all the time, in fact, with students and teachers, that several years ago, a student had a particular class with the professor. And now that student is in the presence of that professor. The student immediately recognizes that professor, but the professor doesn't recognize the student. Why? Because he didn't store the data that well, but the student will store that data. The same thing is true about, for instance, that almost all of the students will know the teacher's name. But the teacher may not ever learn the name of a student that he's got in his class. He doesn't store that data. And so this is why we don't recognize all the people that we've ever met, is because we didn't store it in our internal database. But when you do recognize somebody instantly, they knock on your door, you open your door, and you know it's Fred. Hi, Fred. Why do we recognize Fred? Is because we've got his data stored, and so the perception of him is very quick. And that we can use various pieces of data. For instance, the photo that we see on the screen of Drew, I know that photo. I've seen it a dozen times. But a couple of weeks ago, Drew was on without that photo. He wasn't showing his icon. He was actually on the video. And it took me a couple of minutes to figure out who it was. That figuring out who it was is the perception. That is the Dhammarupa. The Rupa was his physical face on the screen, and the Nama was Drew. The word Drew, and all that I remember about Drew. So his handle was there. So this is what we're actually getting to, is a very good, solid definition of what is perception. And I want to drill on it so that everybody knows what perception is. In the Pali, it has two words. One is Namarupa, which means that we're taking something real and putting a name on it. And the second one is Sanya, and you can look at the word perception itself to see that we are perceiving, or we are something that we do before that second kind of consciousness, which is recognition. All right, so there's another word that we can play with. When we see the word recognition, that means that we recognize. What does recognize mean? That cognization is actually the salayatana, or the actual result. So when we see someone and we recognize them, that means that we go into our database of photos of people, and we bring it up through perception, that process, so that we can recognize someone. And generally, when we recognize something, we can recognize it very fast. That means the perception mechanism is quite fast. But in this case of what happened with Drew a couple of weeks ago, is that I had to process him, mull him over, do some more processing, some more perceiving, and then I recognized him. So these are the words that we would use in English, is that I see it, and then I figure it out, and then I recognize it. And it's that recognition or that salayatana that impacts us to bring up feelings. When you don't recognize something or someone, you don't have the same feelings that you do when you recognize someone and you recognize them as good or bad. Like you recognize someone as a friend, or you recognize someone as a Nazi because he's got an SS uniform on, or you recognize him as a bill collector, and then you will have bad feelings. But the feelings that we have only come after we recognize something. Does everybody believe me on that? You don't have any feelings while you don't understand it. It's only when you understand something to the best of your ability so that you think that you understand it, only then will that understanding impact you enough to have feelings. This is an integral part of Paticca teaching, and also Amit mentioned about the fourth jhana. Basically, what we could see or say is that when someone is in the fourth jhana is when we can see this process happening. So many people.
Question. Sorry,
yes,
I wanted to jump in.
Go right ahead. Jump right in.
Sometimes, well, we can. We know that the database sometimes lies.
Oh, absolutely. It lies in three different ways.
Right? But, like, for example, your database a couple of weeks ago said missing entry, but it was lying. It was saying, no, there is an entry. It just gave you the wrong one. Right. And the wrong one was the fact that it was missing. But sometimes
what
the database
was missing
is genuinely
was
missing.
how fat the face was and what the hair was like, because you had changed that.
Yeah. And I mean, most of the time the database seems to work fine. So I'm like, I'm ready to get but what do I know of this database?
All right. Here's what we know about the database. And we can refer to it nowadays. I think everybody kind of knows what we mean by a database. The word database. Yeah, but
I guess my point is that I don't have I might have a database, but I definitely have perceptions of a database.
Right. Okay. When you have perceptions of the database, this is the mind consciousness that we are conscious of the database. Now, in the Pali, this database that we have is called, help me out, guys. I've forgotten the Pali word. Sankara. The word Sankara is the database, and that it's a whole pile of stuff. One of the things that we like about modern databases is that we can sort through things very quickly, as opposed to study and look through. But in the human mind, it's kind of all piled together, and it's hard to figure out how to sort through all of our memories. So Freud calls this associative memory, or free association, that we have this thought, and then it comes out of the memory, and then we'll have this other thought that comes out of memory, and we put that through the perception process. So you mentioned that the database has got bad data. So let's talk about the three ways that the data is bad, and I'll give it to you very quickly. It's bad on the input, it's bad on the storage, and it's bad on the output. Past, present, and future. Okay, the output is happening in the here now. So what that means is that our sensory input at one time, we were, let us say somebody passed down the street and we didn't bother to look at their face. And it happened to have been the teacher that I had last year. But I didn't look at him, and he didn't look at me, and so we have no memory of each other being on the street together because we weren't looking. This is the most important quality then, is that this is what the Buddha is teaching. This is what a lot of meditation is all about, is to look. Because the more you look, the more data you're putting in your database. And when you're not looking, you're not putting so much data in there. All right? Another thing that happens is that it's stored in a bad way. And what we mean by that is that almost all of our stored memories have feelings already attached to them. For instance, I walked down the street and I saw this guy and I recognized him as a teacher that I had last year, and he gave me an F. And because that old F, and I felt bad when I got that F last year, so when I see that teacher this year, I'm going to have that F as part of my built-in perception, so that I'm going to have the feelings, the bad feelings of an F that I got a year ago. And
You're going to give yourself an F again.
And I give myself an F again. Exactly so. All right. So this is the second way that our memories are distorted, is that we pack in feelings with the actual memories. And then the third kind is that when we get that data back out of our memory, oftentimes we get the wrong memory. We process it incorrectly. And so our memory systems are really not reliable. They weren't reliable because we didn't take the data in. It's not reliable because it was stored with a lot of extra stuff. And it's not reliable on coming out. This is possibly part of the reason why the Buddha makes such a big point, is don't live in the past, because when you're living in the past, you're living in this old sankara and keep bringing old stuff up, which means you're stuck in that feeling system. And so it's better to be here now, because when you're here now, you're taking in new data, and the new data is better than the old data, especially the old data that we stored when we were very, very young. Because when we're very young, as well as our whole lives, almost all of the really important stuff that we store was based upon survival issues. Oh, you stuck your hand in the fire, and that fire is so hot that it impresses us so much that we can easily avoid getting burned again, or cutting our finger, or things like this that get stored very solidly. But a lot of the stuff doesn't get stored hardly at all. An example of that would be when a mother is really angry at her daughter and is really, really yelling at her daughter, the little child will freeze. And because they freeze, all they can do is feel how dangerous it is, because mom's so angry, but mom is yelling at her about what she wants the child to do, but the child doesn't remember it because the child is too busy having bad feelings. So when the boss now is yelling at the employee, the girl who grew up, and yelling at her, telling her that this is the job that needs to be done, she's not listening, because she's feeling the same way that she felt when mom was yelling at her way back when she was a child, and she didn't listen to what mom was yelling about because she was too busy being afraid. So now the boss is yelling at her, and she's too busy being afraid to actually hear what the boss is yelling about. So this is how our old memory systems get messed up really bad, so that we're not there. And so this is why the whole point about waking up and looking at what's going on, taking in new data. Now, if we get in the habit of taking in new data and taking in new data and taking in new data, that whole big pile of good new data will somehow pile on top of all of the old junk. So that if we begin to practice feeling good and practice feeling good and practice feeling good and practice feeling good, then that's the stuff that stores on top of the old database. And so that's the stuff that's most likely to come back up quickly. So the analogies that I would use would be everything that we normally do or say, especially when it's really old, is like a sewer. The old sand cars is like a sewer, a cesspool. And that anything that's thrown into that cesspool, let's say that you had a hamburger and you threw that hamburger into that cesspool, very quickly that hamburger becomes part of the cesspool. It's hardly a hamburger anymore. I mean, can you imagine going and standing over a toilet that's full of poop? You drop your hamburger in it. Are you going to stick your hand into that poop and get your hamburger back out? Oh, no, it's gone now. It's gone. Okay. But let us say there that you put 25 hamburgers in that same toilet. Well, the hamburgers, the recent hamburgers that you put in are now covered with other hamburgers. They're not covered with the toilet. And so you would probably, if you dropped your 25th hamburger into the toilet, it wouldn't, it was just sitting on top. You'll say, hey, I'll take that one. And so this is the way that we begin to understand, oh, we need to keep putting in new, wholesome, helpful, valuable memories to remember to feel good, to remember to feel good, and then those good feeling memories will be what we bring up next time to process. So let's take a time or a moment to process this. Does anybody have any questions again so far? That you can actually, the way to handle our old memories is by having good memories, new ones.
So, Dhammarato, one thing that I've recently come to understand is that talking about psychiatric recovery, one of the points that many people come to during a recovery is that they have to, it's difficult for them to get used to feel good again. Like they, in fact, it say that they have to spend a lot of time making new good memories.
I understand.
So that they become confident that
right.
they can feel good again. Yes.
So let us say then that people get themselves sometimes, let us say some people do it on a regular basis, that all they can do is continue to feel bad. This is where the practice of anapanasati comes into play, is that you have to see that you're having thoughts and perceptions that wind up having you feel bad, and we have to make a change to that. And the change comes in with gladdening the mind or telling ourselves, hey, that's a bunch of old crap. The example would be that we have the feeling that we have to get somebody else's opinion, that we can't trust our own opinion. And so anytime that we think about doing something, like, let us say, go to Milan or go to London, and then the feeling comes up, oh, I need to get permission to go to Milan. Because I have gotten into the habit of being told what to do my whole life. Now I've got something new that I want to do, but I have the same old feelings that I don't have permission to do that I've got to go get permission. The answer to that, obviously, here is give yourself permission right now. Have the kind of thoughts of, it's okay that I make my own choices. It's okay that I go to Milan and enjoy myself. I don't have to ask my daddy's permission. So you can see then that the thought of going to Milan, we've probably been to Milan before, and so this time we go to Milan, but the last time that we went to Milan, we had to ask daddy's permission. And so asking daddy's permission is now packed on to the thought of going to Milan. And when we can see that in our meditation, we can whack that off. And we can say, I don't need my daddy's permission to go anywhere. I can go where I want to go. That would be the wholesome thought. The unwholesome thought is, oh, I had better ask permission. And the answer to that is, you don't need permission. You need to figure things out for yourself. That we needed permission when we were a child. We didn't know enough. But now that we're adults, we do not need daddy's permission to do anything. And so we need to now start packing in, I got to get daddy's permission. That's the old sewage. And we need to start packing that toilet with some new hamburgers. I don't need daddy's permission. I can go where I want to go. I can do what I want to do. I'm a big guy now. I'm a big girl now. I can handle my life. I'm a winner here. And so these are the kind of thoughts that we have. And pretty soon, after we pack enough of those kind of thoughts in, oh, I don't need my dad's permission, then the next time I think about I'm going to go to Milan, I can say, yeah, I can go to Milan. My choice. I don't have to ask anybody else's permission to do that. And so this is an example of that quality of our perception is filtered by or messed up by the old feelings that we had when we had those perceptions or had those memories a long time ago. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start packing in a whole lot of new good feelings, a lot of new hamburgers, so that our toilet is so deep. The toilet is there, but it's buried so deep under all of the good thoughts and all of the good feelings that we've had that very rarely do we go deep enough to get back to that old toilet memory that we have, the old sankaras, the old junk. And so this is why we need to practice over and over and over and over and over again. So in this regard, the answer would be, let us say that somebody's practiced meditation long enough and practice it for quite a number of weeks. And so now they go around generally feeling good. And so what that means is that, yeah, they took a hamburger off of the, the top of the pile, no problem. And they go around and then they stop practicing. What that means then is now every time we perceive something, we go get it out of our perception, and pretty soon we've used up 20 of those hamburgers, and now we've only got 5 of them left. The likelihood of one of those hamburgers being actually in the sewage now is very high. I think everybody has recognized that you go along, you get really good in meditation, and then things are going so well we kind of forget about it, and then we'll go a few weeks or a few months and everything is hunky-dory, and we've quit meditating, and then all of a sudden something happens and we're back in the sewer again. Has anybody experienced that? Everybody has. I know I did.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely. And so what does that mean? It means it's time to start practicing again. It's time to start putting pack them in, hundreds and hundreds of new hamburgers, hundreds and hundreds of new, good, wholesome, happy thoughts. Now, some of you might be against hamburgers, so we can say, all right, well, we're not going to put hamburgers in our toilet. We're going to put some really delicious broccoli. But whatever it is as the analogy, the whole point is that we can start putting good feelings and pack them in on top of our database so that the likelihood of whatever we get out of the database is both new and wholesome. And the processor, that processing is what we call perception. So the question that I would ask is can you see your own perception process? Can you see yourself mulling something over? Can you see this process happening? Drew, can you see that process happening sometimes?
The mulling over?
Yeah, that you've mulled over something. Or do you see that when you recognize someone, that you went through a process to recognize them?
Oh, yeah. I mean, even just walking around, walking on the street, right? I can see, I mean, this is actually probably the most common one is I'm walking around town and I'm seeing strangers, and I'm seeing, oh, I like that stranger. I like the way that one looks. I dislike the way that one looks. Oh, that one's probably like this, and this one's probably like that. Is this it's like a sports commentary almost.
Right.
And I can see the difference because I can see that, but I can hear or I can feel the commentary, right? And obviously I can't see the feeling. I can't see the commentary. I can hear
okay. So we're actually talking about watching the process happen.
Yeah.
As I said, sometimes it happens instantly and sometimes it happens slowly. For instance, you're walking down the street and somebody's coming in the opposite direction. You see them and you instantly recognize them. Do you actually also recognize that that's because you had stored that person in your database?
Well, I mean, this is the thing I was trying to get at earlier. Like, what I actually notice is I see someone, and then I know the feeling of recognizing them, and then I know their name, and then I know, like, it kind of just pops up.
All right. So this is where we're going in this direction. Is, can you see, or can you perceive that you are perceiving?
Yeah.
Can you begin to see or perceive the process of perceiving? This is actually what the Buddha was referring to in the fourth jhana. Now, I'll take a couple of minutes and talk about jhanas, just a little bit. Number one, there is only 4 jhanas. There is no more than that. Anybody who says that there's more than 4 is inventing something, and probably what they're doing when they call it a 5th or a 6th or a 7th or an 8th or a 9th jhana is they're talking about aspects of the 4th jhana. Number 2, everybody is capable of going into those states quickly, but coming back out of them. So in that regard, the 4th jhana is not something that you want to attain because it's something that you're already doing. And it doesn't take months or years. What it takes months or years to do is to be able to hang in there in that state of knowing that you're knowing. The knowing or the processing, that you're processing, that you're processing. This is the whole point then, is that we can do this from the first jhana, but it happens pretty fast. It's almost like an aha. I see what I'm doing. But that aha loses the 4th jhana, and so we can go in and touch it. And this is a better way of doing it, rather than trying to gain a skill of 4th jhana. We want to just touch it so that we can begin to understand how we invent stuff. That in fact you could go so far as to say that every thought you have is an invention. You're making stuff up. And we live our lives based upon what we have made up, not upon what's real. We make stuff up on, going back to walking down the street. If you walk down the street even a block, you're probably perceiving 1,000 different things. Perception goes through that spin cycle 1,000 times or more just to walk down 1 block on the street. In other words, you look down, you see the curb. Oh, I should not step off the curb. You see a crack in the pavement, and you say, oh, I shouldn't step on that crack. You see a light pole right in front of you, you should say, I'm going to move around it. But you don't have to have a real...
along a curved road.
Pardon?
It's good to try and pay attention to this when you're walking along a curved road.
When you're walking along a curve, I was thinking about a city street. When you're walking around a curved road, you're doing a whole lot of perception to stay on that road.
Yeah. It's weird, but without even paying attention, each, like, not each step, but depends on how curved the road is, but like just one of those steps was like, oh, it was just slightly off straight, and then it keeps doing that by itself.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we've gotten two kind of points now. One is to fully understand what perception is. And number two, can you see it when it's happening? And both of these are skills that can be developed through the practice of anapanasati. That in fact, going through that point about remembering to wake up and to take a look and then to make a change has perceptions built into that. Okay, the perception of waking up, the perception of looking, and the perception of recognizing that I can do better than this and then making a change. So right noble effort is a way of changing the way that we're perceiving things, as well as changing the data that we're perceiving. And so the gladdening of the mind then would be putting in new input and processing it in a new way. And so this is the practice. We have to keep practicing over and over and over again, because every time that we practice something, the result is stored away, like the hamburgers. So every time that you see the street and say, I'm not going to step off onto the off the curb, that's because you've done that many, many times. And so it takes very, very little processing, and it happens very quickly. But if you happen to walk down the road, curved or whatever, and you see somebody laying in the road, now we're going to start doing a whole lot of processing. And we're going to be digging up a whole lot of stuff. We're going to look at the way that this person is dressed. So if it's a gorgeous babe in tights laying on the road, we're going to have, I got to go check that out. But if it's, let us say, a dead dog that's covered with blood, then when we see that laying in the road, we're going to have a different reaction to it based upon our memories and our sankharas. And so we perceive it differently. Not because in fact, it's new in both cases. But we use the old data to process how we're going to respond or react to what we're seeing on the road as we walk down the road. So the question is, can you take control of that? Can you take control of your perception? That the bottom line that the Buddha talks about is that when you stop perceiving stuff, then you stop having feelings about it. Which means then that we can control it. The Buddha says that if you can stop it, then you can stop your feelings. That means that you can take control over it. So the first thing is in this talk is that we have to understand what perception is. And then we have to be able to see it in its process. Oh, yes, I'm perceiving, and that the way that I'm perceiving is based upon past old data, memories that may not be accurate. Then we can begin to see everything as new, because the reality is everything is new. The last time I saw a dead dog in the road is not the same as this time I see a dead dog in the road. In fact, this dog may not be dead. I perceive that it's dead, but it may not be dead. This gorgeous babe that's in the road, I perceive her as a gorgeous babe, but if I take a little closer look, she may not be a gorgeous babe. This is why we want to keep looking and keep looking and keep adding new data, rather than spending all of our time figuring out stuff that we see one time and then add a bunch of stuff out of the past. So being in the present moment means that we spend a whole lot more time in consciously receiving data and less time perceiving what we've seen. And we can take control of that so that we keep looking and keep looking and keep looking and seeing what it is in reality. Kind of the way to perceive it is it's just another hamburger. Let's throw that in our pile of hamburgers, because that pile of hamburgers is really covering up all the old crap. So the practice then is, can we see when we're perceiving? Can we recognize that that's what's happening so that we can begin to take some control over it? Does anybody have any questions about it so far?
Well, yes.
Yes. Jerry.
Well, I think I discussed with you once before. I saw a video by a sister, Kema, who was, I think, one of Bhante Vimalaransi's people, talking about the steps of the earlier steps of dependent origination being carried on at an unconscious level. Now, where does this come in, and how are you supposed
We're going to make it conscious.
Well, yeah, well, that's the point. That's the point. I mean, let us say that you have got a memory in your Sankara of something hurtful that Auntie Susie, your famous Auntie Susie that you talk about, said to you when you were a child. Now, somebody says something to you in the exact same tone and the exact same content of what Auntie Susie said, and the same lust to kill immediately arises that, you know, Auntie Susie gave you when you were a little boy and too little to kill her. But never mind that. But all this is happening. Where does this come in? I mean, this is before the Vedana comes up, isn't it? Or is it before the Vedana comes up?
Well, that wanting to kill her is after the Vedana.
That's after the Vedana comes up.
Why? Because what the Vedana was actually is, I don't like this tone of voice.
Quite.
Mm-hmm. Why? Because it has the old tone of voice built into the perception.
Right. So.
All right, here's what we can do with that. We can practice this way by every time that we have a thought of Aunt Susie, we can say, oh, may Aunt Susie be happy.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, she used to yell at us, but we're going to be okay now. We don't have to feel bad because somebody yells at us. And so then in reality, the next day, somebody yells at us and we can handle it better.
Mm-hmm. But you see, a little problem I have with your hamburger analogy is that you're simply burying and burying deeper the sort of lust to kill that provoked by Auntie Susie sort of thing.
Right. We want to bury that stuff really deep in our very happy feelings.
But that's the point. I mean, how you know, it's still going to be there underneath. It's still going to come up, and it seems a little simplistic to say you're just putting in so much new stuff that you forget it.
Yes, all right.
But you don't forget it because it's in your sankharas.
Well, yes, but you have a choice now. If you are aware that you're perceiving that you want to kill someone, you're probably not going to do it, just like you didn't do it when you were a kid. You really didn't kill Aunt Susie, so you're probably not going to kill this guy. But what I'm saying is that because we know what's going on, we have a choice. When we were a little kid, we didn't have any choice at all. We felt like we wanted to kill Aunt Susie and we couldn't do it, and that was it. But now, because we've been practicing, we'll say, wait a minute, I'm not going to pull I want to kill Aunt Susie out of my database. I'm going to pull out, I can handle this guy. I'm a big, strong guy now. Just because he's yelling at me, maybe it would be good and wise if I would listen to him rather than treat him like he was the Aunt Susie that I wanted to kill, because we didn't listen to Aunt Susie when we wanted to kill her. We were more thinking about wanting to kill her than we were listening to what she has to say. So now the question is, when somebody's yelling at you in the present time, can you remember that it is better for me to listen to what this guy is saying rather than having thoughts about wanting to kill him?
Or are you simply using your memories of No, your memories of good stuff, that is your hamburgers, to slow the arrival of Aunt Susie from the database in the bottom.
Excellent analogy, to slow it down. And pretty soon, when we have 1 million hamburgers on top of a toilet, when the whole bathroom is full of hamburgers, then it's really slowed down. This is why we have to keep practicing. Keep practicing. This is so valuable that you've heard me say it so many times, rinse and repeat, over and over and over again. We actually need to practice. And when we need to practice the most is when we recognize that the kind of perceptions and the kind of feelings that we're having right now are not worth having. That's just old memories. Okay. And it hurt us then, and it's going to hurt us now. Let's have some happy thoughts. The happy thought is, I can fix this. I can do it. That in fact, Kat's watched me do this and several other of the students about the developers that we've had on our database. And if I have the thoughts of, they're not doing a good job, they're slow, they break things that they fixed, like that, that's not beneficial for me. But if I have in thoughts instead, I can figure it out. I can do it myself. I don't need them. Let me take my time and figure it out, and everything's going to be okay. Right? But in the old days when I didn't get my way, I would be that angry, they're doing it wrong, and I hate them and all of that. But now I can say, never mind. We'll figure it out. I can get this done. So those are the wholesome thoughts that we want to have. And the only reason that I can do that is because I practiced having wholesome thoughts when I don't get my way. And so the most excellent time to practice then is when you don't get your way. This is exactly what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is talking about. He says that it's an excellent time to practice when we're sick. Why? Because nobody wants to be sick. And the way to practice being sick, practicing anapanasati when we're sick, is to say, the body's sick, but the mind is not. Never mind. I'm going to have fun laying in bed. Let me treat the body well. Let me perceive that I'm nurturing the body rather than hating the body because it's sick. But we can expand that to any time we don't get our way. An example of that is you walk up to a door that you expect to be open, you turn the knob and it's locked. How do you feel? How do you feel? Almost everybody, when we expect a door to be open and we turn the handle and it's locked, we don't like that. We hate it. We start blaming somebody. Who locked the door? Isn't that the first thought that we have? Of who did this to me? All right? And that's the perception that comes up with no answer. And so we get confused and frustrated. But the right thing to do is to recognize, maybe I don't need to go through this door right now. Maybe I can go off and be happy someplace else. Or maybe I could figure out a way of opening that door. I mean, after all, I do a lock kit. I know how to pick a lock. That door's not going to stop me. Okay, so these are the kind of thoughts that we can have instead. But normally what happens when we go to open a locked door and it's locked, we don't like that. We go into bad feelings. We try to blame somebody for our bad feelings. So this whole point about teaching about perception mainly is most beneficial when we don't get what we want. And I bet while walking down that curved road for a half a mile, many times we don't get what we want. And so can we remember that, if I don't get what I want, I have a choice about how I feel about it. That I can perceive things differently rather than going down the same old path that we've always gone down. So when you're sick, instead of saying, oh, poor me, I'm sick, I'll probably die. This illness is going to kill me. Oh, I'm so temporary. And I bet the older part of our group has those thoughts more often. I bet Agnes and Jerry know exactly what I'm talking about. This is the end of me. This thought, this is going to kill me. And the answer instead is, oh, I'm sick, so what? I'll enjoy this. Everybody else is pretty well permitted with when you don't get what you want. How are you going to handle that? Now, the first perception is probably, I don't like it. That feeling comes up. But then we recognize, oh, wait a minute, I have a choice. Let's go perceive this differently. Instead of getting, I don't like being locked out, we can go get a hamburger and say, oh, the door's locked. Maybe they're closed. I don't need to do it. The reason that I wanted to do that, open that and go through that door is probably because I didn't like something in the first place. If I was really happy in the first place, I wouldn't even have tried the door.
Yep.
So this is the whole point about perception. Can we see that we are perceiving something that brings up bad feelings? And then we have a choice about, well, let's do a redo. Never mind, start again. Yeah, I didn't like it because the door was locked, but guess what? Now I don't have to go through that door. Isn't that marvelous? Isn't that wonderful? This is what perception is really all about. This is why the Buddha would take the time to really talk about it, in the sense of recognizing that it's your perception and the way that you see things that give rise to the result that impacts us in such a way that we feel bad. But we can get a redo. Never mind, let's go do that again. Let's this time pull better data out of our database. So we have to make sure that we've got some good data in the database. This is why we want to practice Anapanasati, is so we can start building up that Sankara of good feelings.
Yep.
And we don't need to go into those really, really deep meditation states in order to be able to do this. It's much more of a practice issue. We have to practice feeling good about whatever's happening right now, including not getting what you want. Can you wind up feeling really good when you don't get what you want? Your choice. Because think about it, how many times a day do you not get what you want? I grab my coffee cup. It's empty. I wanted a cup of coffee. I wanted to drink of water, and it's empty. The cup is empty now. I don't like that. Let me go get some more coffee. Where in fact, picking up the cup was kind of like a habit anyway. So why should I feel bad? That's my choice. Many times a day, we don't get what we want. Why do we have to go around feeling bad about it? The answer is because that's what we've got stored in our database. It's bad feelings. All the events that happened long ago. The coffee cup is empty. Oh, poor me, I'm going to die. I don't have coffee.
Okay. Hang on a minute. I just need to say I need to go now. I've got something to do. So sorry for that, and thanks for the talk, and good wishes to everybody. Okay.
All right. Well, Jerry, I'm really glad to see you. In fact, you waited us out because it's already been an hour. And yeah, so why don't we wrap this up? Because I think that we've gotten the point. We've come to a conclusion is that it's your choice, but the best choice to have is to have a whole lot of good feelings packed in there. So when something happens when you don't like it, you can choose to feel good instead of going to the old ways of feeling bad about everything. So, Gary, we'll see you later. Does anybody else have any questions or thoughts or on this? Yeah, got it, Drew. How about Agnes? I'm so glad to see you again, Agnes. It's been a few months. Got to tell a story about Agnes. Of all of the people that you'll meet on Skype, Agnes is the oldest student that I've got. She's got you all beat. Why is that? Because we date back to about what, 2000? The year 2000? It's been about 25 years that I've known you.
Yeah.
And I've watched you since we've been on the Skype. So you started in, I think, what, 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
And I think you've gotten a lot of Dhamma.
Yes, I have. And I would say it kind of saved me at the time, around 2000 there. It really saved my life, actually. And so, and this was a very, very helpful talk to listen to this, because I've been thinking about those things. I didn't even know I had a question about it. So now things fell into place again. So I'm so thankful. Thank you so much for this. So yeah, and I'm quite happy, I would say. Yeah.
Good. I'm really, really glad to see you again. Okay. Amit, do you have any comments? Because you were the one who asked this question in the first place. Do you think that you've gotten a decent answer yet?
Yes, thanks a lot, Dhammarato. I think this is a very deep question with maybe different layers of answers, but I'm satisfied for now. Maybe we can discuss more in the next some.
There is more to it than this, but this is a good talk we've had. How about you, Marcus?
Yeah, I have a short comment and a question. So the comment is that it's great to see so many people in the call today. We had like 10 people, I think. It's been a while since there's been so many folks around. So that's really great. And
yes.
The second was a quick question about the jhana thing. So when the suttas talk about, first, second, third, fourth, and then they start talking about these perceptions of infinite space and consciousness, is that just all happening in the fourth jhana?
Well,
or is that something else?
First off, to even begin to answer your question is going to take more time than we have for this call.
Oh, okay.
But I will begin it by mentioning one thing, and that is infinite did not exist as a concept in the time of the Buddha. Therefore, it is totally incorrect to use the word infinite when talking about the space or the consciousness. That in fact, infinite consciousness, what that really means is that when we stop perceiving and start investigating or taking in data, there's no end to it. That the world is constantly at a very, very high rapid rate of speed, feeding us all kinds of data, but we don't process it correctly. The way to correctly process it is to immediately put it into the Sankara without processing it at all. But this is what we mean by infinite. It's not infinite. What it is it's not bounded by perception. And that we do not have to be in a fourth jhana state in order to do that. Or another way of saying it is that when you do that, you're in the fourth jhana. When you're not processing, you're merely experiencing the data as it's coming in. An example of that is, Scott told us about this. He was hiking up a hill in the mountains, and a whole group of people were coming down the mountain, down that path, chattering at each other and doing this and that. And as he got right there with when they were just approaching him, he turned around and looked at the vista, and in a ordinary voice that they could hear, he said, "Wow, isn't that gorgeous?" And they all stopped and looked. Now, can you imagine? Here they go all the way from the city up into the mountains to experience the mountains, and they're not. They're not paying attention to where they are. Okay? But when they do that wow sensation, when you go to a place when you're absolutely overblown, like looking off the side of a very tall building and seeing the microscopic cars that are the size of ants, or when you're looking out over the vista of the mountains, or watching a sunset. You're actually watching, you're not perceiving it. That in fact, one of the things that could happen is somebody has the thought, oh, this is so beautiful, let me get my camera out. And while they're getting their camera out, they're not experiencing. When they're taking the photo, they're not experiencing. And so later, when they show that person the photo, if they got a little bit of that wow sensation, they will remind themselves of that wow. That's why they got the camera out, is because it was wow. But they show that photo to somebody, the person that they showed the photo to does not get a wow. They start looking and perceiving instead of just looking. So this is what we mean by infinite consciousness is that we're continually to look. That our consciousness is boundless because we're not interrupting it or boxing it up with perception. But it's a really poor translation, this word infinite, when it actually means that the boundaries have been removed. The same thing with infinite space, that it's not an infinite space, but your body itself merges into the environment. When you look out over that thing and you go, wow, then the body almost disappears. So this, when we put words like infinite space and infinite consciousness and neither perception or non-perception and nothingness and all these highfalutin words, people go, wow, these fourth jhana states must really be magical, because gosh, I never saw anybody do that. And in fact, we do it all the time. We just don't know that we're doing it. That we pass in and out of the fourth jhana every time that we look at something, and we go kind of into that wow state, and we begin to continue to look at it. This is one of the reasons why people like to go to sports events, by the way, is because while they're actually watching what's going on the field, they're not thinking about it so much. It's only when some kind of play that happens that they remind themselves of what it's supposed to be like, and that's when they start cheering and getting angry and throwing their cups and getting all upset and everything like that. And they also like that wow sensation when their team wins, because they like that really good feeling. So these states of infinite consciousness means that we're just paying attention to what's going on. Infinite space means that you're really there. Neither perception nor non-perception is the thing that we've been talking about earlier. Do you know when you're knowing? Do you perceive that you are perceiving? Do you actually know that what you're seeing, you're taking it in? So there's just enough perception there to know that you're seeing. This is what they mean by neither perception nor non-perception. The non-perception means that we're not doing heavy-duty processing, but the perception that is there is a tiny little bit, just enough perception to say, wow, but we're not having a long conversation about it. All right? So these states that we talk about in the fourth jhana are ordinary kinds of things that happen to us all the time. Wakey, wakey, watch what you're doing. See what's happening. Recognizing that you do have control over the way that you perceive things. Your choice when you can see it. If you can't see what's happening, you've got no choice at all. This is why it's good to keep practicing and keep practicing, so that we can begin to figure out, actually see how the mind itself works. Because most people don't even understand this issue of that how we feel is based upon the results of our perception. And if we stop perceiving things, we go into a wow state. Good question. Does anybody else have anything to say? Or did I answer your question, Marcus?
Yeah, I think it made it a lot clearer and less fancy. Which,
That these states that the Buddha talking about are not fancy. It's a way of coming out of dukkha. And how we get ourselves into dukkha is perceiving, and watching, and then digging it out and getting frustrated and all that kind of stuff. But the Buddha says, no, just keep watching, keep looking. Recognizing only that it's either wholesome or unwholesome, and then we have a choice. Catho, do you have anything to say?
Well, sometimes I'm surprised when hamburgers come up instead of sewage. That happens. So I'm really happy about that. I'm really happy when hamburgers come up now.
Yeah, that you keep putting a lot of hamburgers on top, and that's what'll come back up for you.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well,
guys,
I have
go ahead.
One very quick clarification point is you are using perception in two ways. So one is looking, and the another I think is a processing, right? So when you say we should not perceive, it means we are looking and we are not processing it in our mind, but we just keep looking.
Right.
It is
right. Always a middle path. If we don't do any perception at all, that would be like out of it, maybe asleep or whatever. Okay. So that point that's called neither perception or non-perception is a middle pathway. The middle path, rather than being too much in perception and just thinking about stuff over and mulling it over, trying to find a solution, or worse still, perceiving things in a harmful way, having unwholesome thoughts and then unwholesome feelings about it. But then the other extreme would be no perception at all. And so that sweet spot is to be able to see and know that you're seeing, to be there with it. So guys, thank you very much for this call. Did I miss Pedro? Pedro, do you have any last remarks to make?
Just a big thank you to you and all the friends.
Excellent. All right, guys. Thank you so much, Agnes, for showing up at long last. I'm really glad to see you. And all of my friends. All right. Well, bye-bye.
Right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.